All right, welcome back to the second lecture on the Integumentary system, Chapter 5, the skin. Okay, in our last lecture, we did kind of some introductory notes here on the skin in general, and then we began talking about the epidermis. And we got through the types of cells and the layers of the epidermis. There are 4 or 5 layers in the epidermis, and we're right here. We're going to start going through into the science of skin color. It's one of my favorite topics to talk about, and I'll show you why. Okay, we learned about the 5 layers here, the different strata. Remember, come, let's get sunburned. That's our mnemonic. Okay. And we were here, we last talked about keratinization, the specialization that is true of the outer layer of our skin, the epidermis. Because of that special protein, okay? Now, we will talk about perspiration, okay? Because one of these special things that keratin does is it reduces evaporation, okay? It is a waterproof barrier, and we often think waterproof means keeping water out from the outside, but that's not necessarily the most important function. The waterproofing is really to disallow evaporation from the inside out, okay? This sounds kind of strange, but if we were allowed to just, all the water in our body could just freely leave our body at any moment, then the moment we went outside, it would evaporate quite quickly. So the skin, our skin actually keeps us from desiccating or dehydrating. Now, we still sweat, okay? That is still true, but sweat is a glandular secretion. It's not necessarily the evaporation of water out of our skin, okay? So that's why we're moving here to talk about perspiration, okay? Technically speaking, there's 2 types of perspiration. One is called insensible, and one is called sensible perspiration. Insensible is what we refer to as just evaporation, okay? Insensible for evaporation, E for I, both begin with a vowel, so hopefully that helps you keep them straight. Okay, sensible for sweat, S and S. Okay, again, easy handles and mnemonics to help us memorize all the things. Okay, evaporation. And again, because we're covered with this continuous layer of keratin, we really minimize the evaporation because of that connectivity of the keratin. Okay, so this type of perspiration is very minimal. There is a little bit, but it's not much. When we talk about water leaving our body through the skin, this is a more common way that we talk about it, okay? Sensible perspiration, that is active sweating, okay? And so this is really released by sweat glands. There's 2 types of sweat glands that we will talk about, and dehydration can result from damage to the stratum. So if you have a burn victim and lots of your exterior epidermis has been lost due to burn damage, a real risk is dehydration because they are no longer protected, because large stretches of the body, if you're in the burn unit, okay, horrible place to work, but some people have a special gift for that. They really have to check and keep tabs on hydration, okay, and have special measures to keep them protected. All right. Also, you can get dehydrated through immersion in a hypertonic solution like salt water. It's a way of kind of drying you out because you're surrounded in salt water. There's going to be an increased movement of water due to osmosis. Okay? But again, our keratin is doing a pretty good job of keeping the water inside of us. All right, now, one of my favorite topics to teach about, the science of skin color, okay? The science of skin color. Notice all of these beautiful human beings and all of the variety of skin color. Pantone is I think it's an organization or a repository of all the colors in the world, okay? Each color has a specific number, all the shades of red and blue and purple and orange and brown and tan and beige, okay? And so for each of these individuals, okay, they did an average of their skin tone and they assigned them a certain skin color. It was just for kind of like an art project, okay? But you can notice that there's a high degree of variability. It's not just black and white. It's all different types of beige and pink and brown and really dark brown and light brown and really, really white. Okay, there's a lot of variety, okay, across human populations. All across the globe, there's a great deal of variety. Where does that variety of skin tone come from? What is the science behind it? We're going to learn about that. Okay, there are skin colors influenced by primarily two pigments, okay, keratin and melanin. Okay, you probably have heard of melanin. Keratin is more of a yellowish orange color pigment. And then of course blood circulation, that is how flushed you look can also influence the color of your skin. But it's not a pigment. Okay, first keratin, it's an orange-yellow pigment found in orange vegetables. Okay, so if you eat your carrots or your squash or anything else that has that orange color, there's bound to be beta carotene in those vegetables. Okay, so taste the rainbow. It's not just the marketing for Skittles, but it means that you take in those colorful nutrients because they often are because of vitamins that are good for you. Okay, so if you have a colorful plate when you're eating your fresh fruits and vegetables, that is usually good for your health. Not everything is just brown and bland, okay, and cooked. Okay, you need those fresh fruits and vegetables. Okay, so we need beta carotene for lots of reasons. It can be derived from vitamin A. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Melanin, the more common skin pigment, okay, can range from yellow-brown to black, a very dark brown. It's produced by melanocytes, and they have melanosomes inside of the melanocytes. Okay. The melanocytes transfer the melanin to the keratinocytes. So there's actually a pigment transfer into the keratinocytes. We'll talk about that. Okay. These melanocytes live in the stratum basale, in the bottom layer. Okay, the stratum basale is where these melanocytes live. Okay, so here's a picture of the epidermis. Okay, and this is the dermis down here. Here's the basement membrane. You can see it's kind of this up and down. And in this case, it's not natural pigment, but these melanocytes have been specially stained to recognize the presence of these melanocytes. Okay, and you can see they have like little cellular projections that kind of reach out into surrounding keratinocytes. Okay, they look kind of like an octopus. Okay, and that is true to the shape of the cell. But they live in the bottom of the layer, and they are actually transferring melanin to these surrounding cells, okay, which it doesn't appear like it's transferring that much, because right now we're just staining for the melanocytes. We're not actually looking at melanin. I know that's confusing. You say, well, why isn't the melanin all throughout here? It is, but this particular stain is only identifying the melanocytes, not just melanin. In this picture here, you can see there's a little bit of brown here, and actually it's interspersed into the rest of the epidermis. So, zooming in, here's a cartoon of what a melanocyte would look like. Like I described, it looks kind of like an octopus. Okay? It has lots of arms and little cellular projections, and there's lots of little speckles of melanosomes, which contain melanin, and it's really distributing. It's like a distributing center for melanin. You get some melanin, and you get some melanin, and you get some melanin. And as these melanosomes work their way up those cellular projections, they get darker and darker, and by the time they reach the end, now we have this mature form of melanin. So, a little bit about the biochemistry of melanin, okay? I'm not going to expect you to memorize this pathway, but there is a couple of molecules that you need to know, okay? We start off with tyrosine. Tyrosine is one of our 20 amino acids. It's one of the traditional amino acids that is found in all proteins. And from tyrosine, we can make melanin. Okay, this is the biosynthetic pathway for making melanin. And there's two types of melanin that we can make, eumelanin and pheomelanin. Eumelanin is the more traditional brown to black, dark brown to light brown, and pheomelanin is more of the yellowish and light orangish form of melanin. Okay, so there's two forms here. Even though it shows three, these two kind of follow a similar family. So from tyrosine down to formation of melanin, there's several steps, and those are governed by a set of different enzymes, only one of which I want you to memorize. Okay? And so this enzyme right here that converts tyrosine to something called L-DOPA, okay? You don't have to memorize that, but you do need to know this enzyme. It's called tyrosinase, okay? Tyrosinase is the enzyme that converts tyrosine to this first step in this pathway. It turns out to be a very important enzyme because if it's missing, well then we don't make melanin. Okay? So here's eumelanin and here's pheomelanin. They're slightly different in their structure and therefore they elicit a different wavelength when light shines on it. Okay? So in the cell of a melanocyte, okay, we can have different melanosomes, and if you're in different melanosomes make different types of melanin. And along this pathway, these melanosomes, which is a vesicle that contains melanin, the color is really maturing, and you form more mature melanin the darker it gets, okay? The more the brown-black or the orange-yellow. And so here we have another picture, and surrounding are all of these keratinocytes, okay? Melanocyte, keratinocytes. Now, what I want you to focus in on here is how these cells gain melanin from the melanocyte. Okay? If you see here that there is these keratinocytes literally bite off a chunk of the tip of the melanocyte. So they are really kind of phagocytizing the melanocyte. Okay? They bite off a little bit, and the keratinocyte then breaks open that vacuole, and the melanin internalizes inside of the keratinocyte and provides some protection, okay? Notice, where does the melanin go, okay? It goes right over top of the nucleus. Why is that? Why would the melanin congregate just over top of the nucleus? Okay, we're gonna learn why. So, what explains the diversity of skin color? Okay, it's not just that darker skinned people have melanin and the rest of the people don't. It's the type of cells, it's the number of cells, it's the number of melanosomes, and it's the type of melanin that is produced. Okay, so there are three different things that are at play here, because all people have the same number of melanocytes. The cells that make melanin, we all have the same number of cells, okay? So that's not the difference. It's really the type of melanin that we make, okay? The type of melanin, the size of the melanosome, and the type of melanin that is produced, okay? So if you're from African descent or Asian or European, they have slight differences in the types of melanin. Sometimes it's a mixture, sometimes it's more of a black or brown, sometimes it's more of a yellowish red. Okay, we have all those different varieties depending on these different genetic variability. Okay. And as I said before, if you notice how all of these cells accumulate melanin from the melanocyte, okay, here's a darkly pigmented individual versus a lightly pigmented individual. And the size of the melanocytes or the melanosomes can vary, okay? So the amount of melanin and the size of the melanosomes can differ between different populations. But in all cases, you notice that it is actually kind of covering the apical position relative to the nucleus, okay? The apical position relative to the nucleus. So why is that, okay? Melanin protects skin from sun damage. So ultraviolet light, UV radiation, can actually be stopped by melanin. Melanin can absorb UV, okay? So it's very protective. So melanin production is very important. So just a background here on light, okay? So you know that light is a wavelength, right? We have really long wavelength, we can have really short wavelength. And as we vary wavelength, we get different energy. Okay, everything down here in the long wavelength is very low energy, and it's innocent, it's harmless. Okay, but as we get to a certain point, suddenly we go from non-ionizing wavelengths of energy to suddenly ionizing. Okay, ionizing means that the wavelength is now so short that it can actually penetrate deep into a tissue and cause damage. Okay, so there's a thin window here, okay, that we call visible light, okay, and that's where we get the Roy G. Biv, right? Red, orange, yellow, green, all the other ones, okay? Indigo, violet. And that's what we call ultraviolet, okay? If we're ultra, they're more powerful than violet, and that's where we begin UV radiation. And UV radiation is at the very low side of ionizing radiation, okay? So there's different incidental rays coming from the sun, UVA, UVB, and UVC. And so if you have long wavelength, okay, it doesn't matter, okay, harmless. But once you get to these really short wavelengths, then that begins to make a difference. So people are all afraid of these like kind of long wavelength radio signals, okay, 5G and radios and whatever, okay, completely harmless because it's non-ionizing. Those waves can't hurt you. So what is the mechanism by which UV causes damage? Okay, what's the mechanism by which UV causes damage? So here's our ultraviolet light, okay, and you need two neighboring thymines, okay? This is a stretch from the DNA. You have two nitrogenous bases, and if you have neighboring T's, okay, and you get some UV light, those T's can cross-react and cause what's called a thymine dimer. Okay? A thymine dimer, it's only present when you have neighboring thymine. Okay? And that is a mutation. Okay? It's a covalent change, and therefore you get a kink in the DNA, and you can cause a change in the genetic code, okay? Which can have downstream effects. Okay? That's a thymine dimer. That's what happens when you have too much sun damage. Now, under normal circumstances, our DNA polymerases and our cells have repair mechanisms. So they can identify thymine dimers and then fix them. But if you have too much mutation and not enough time to fix them in between, sometimes some of those mutations can slip through the cracks, okay? So our body has plenty of repair enzymes, but it's just it's a waiting game, okay? More sun damage than repair, because the repair can only happen at a certain rate. So lots and lots of sun damage, you're gonna overwhelm the system and they can't repair it sufficiently. All right, I chuckle. I found this on social media, which is, again, a bastion of all things, you know, sciencey and smart sounding, but in some cases it's just trash, okay? So, protect the guilty. How many hours per day do most Americans spend on their phones? And then computers, iPads, and other screens? I had no idea how bad blue light is for our skin. It can be worse than the sun. So how do we protect our skin? And then insert whatever they're selling. Okay, they have this image here, a chunk of skin. Oh, here's UVA, here's UVB, and then there's blue light, supposedly from your computer screen or your iPhone. Okay, and blue light is much worse than UV. Okay, absolute garbage, right? You need to become an educated student, an individual, and citizen, so that when you see this type of garbage, you say, that's not true. That's not how science works, okay? Because if we go back to this diagram here, we learn about ionizing versus non-ionizing wavelengths, and we realize that blue light is this side of the ionizing wavelengths, okay? So that you can tell this individual, I'm sorry, you're misinformed. Different wavelengths have different energies, and blue light is within the visible spectrum, which is non-ionizing, okay? And then you get them to, you know, whatever. So, become a smart citizen and be helpful. Don't be smug and a jerk, okay? That's very easy, right? You can say, oh, you're such a dummy, okay? Don't do it that way. All right, so application, okay? We learned about how skin pigment varies across different populations, but there's other ways in which we can have variation in skin color, okay? The capillaries and skin color can contribute, right? So oxygenated red blood provides a redness to your skin. So if you're exercising, you get all hot and sweaty and flushed, your face might be really red, right? This is because your capillaries are now kind of expanded and full of blood in a way that is not true when you're resting. So that can influence coloration as well, or if you're really cold or whatever, okay? Rosacea is a condition where you have increased redness in the face and often in the cheeks. Okay, we'll see a couple examples of that. The ultimate cause of this is not well known or well understood. There are a couple treatments, but there's no real cure for it. And you might know some people that have that. It can be exacerbated by different triggers or sunlight in some cases. So rosacea is a kind of a skin condition with unknown causes. Okay? Cyanosis. Cyanosis is the blueness of skin. Okay? It's a bluish skin tint, and it's caused by a reduction in oxygenation. Okay? If you are poorly oxygenated, you might get cyanosis. Okay? Jaundice. Jaundice is a yellowing of the skin. Okay? It's a buildup of bile produced in the liver, and it has an accumulation of these products in the skin because your liver is damaged. Okay? We'll learn more about the liver dynamics, about why jaundice is caused, but for now, just know that when you see a yellowing of the skin, it is caused by jaundice, which is a liver defect. Okay? You have liver problems when this is true. So if you have a really bad alcoholic that has liver failure, okay, you might see jaundice. My wife had an uncle that was an alcoholic for many, many years, and he died of liver failure. And in his last few months, I mean, his skin was very, very yellow. It was very noticeable. We could have other problems that cause changes, but we will not get to that until the endocrine system. All right, so a couple of slides here. This is an infant, and it's subtle, okay? Cyanosis is a subtle detection, but normally you can detect it in the fingertips, the toes, and around the mouth and the lips, okay? Sometimes the earlobes, but right around here you notice kind of a bluish tint, okay? You have to get accustomed to seeing it in real life, okay? That's a cyanosis. Here again, it's a slight bluish appearance around the mouth. Now, don't go around to all your nieces and nephews that are babies and say, oh, they have cyanosis, okay? Because you probably might not diagnose that correctly. But once you get to the clinic and you get used to that, there might be things that cause that, and you can have an idea of some of the signs and symptoms. Okay, jaundice, okay? One of the places which you notice it first is in the whites of the eye, okay? All of your body begins to accumulate this yellow pigment, okay? Because your liver is not processing it correctly. And so you notice it where your tissue should be white, like the whites of your eyes, and the sclera, it becomes yellow. Okay, and even here, okay, this gentleman, it's not just the camera and bad lighting, that's actually the skin looks very, very yellow, okay? Probably going through some type of liver problem. It's not always alcoholism, okay? There's lots of things that can mess up your liver, okay? So it's not always, that type of issue. Okay, and then here's rosacea. Okay, rosacea often appears on the nose and on the tops of the cheeks, and kind of has this, okay, it's called kind of raccoon mask appearance, and it can be very irritating and painful, but you can control it with some medication and avoiding certain triggers that you know cause it if you have rosacea. All right, a couple other ones here. Addison's disease is an endocrine disease. It can cause skin darkening. We're not going to go into that in much detail, but when we get to the endocrine system, we'll come back to this. And vitiligo, okay? Vitiligo, you might see some people that have a very stark contrast within their skin color and the pigmentation. Okay, it's because of a loss of melanocytes. There are regions or chunks of their skin that have lost the melanocytes. And the reasons for that are variable. They don't really fully know. And there's not really any cure other than trying to even out the pigment due to creams and makeup. Vitiligo. All right. In general, we talked about melanin, right? Melanin is a highly conjugated ring structure, and like other pigments that have a similar conjugated ring structure. So fall is coming up, right? We're in the season of fall. It's Arkansas, it's where we are. And we're noticing in the coming months that leaves will begin to change, okay? We go from chlorophyll, which is green, to the yellows, oranges, and reds. Now, my home state is Michigan, and Michigan has lots of red maples or sugar maples. You get a lot of this nice bright color, red, not so much where we are now. But all of these colors are linked to a certain molecule, okay? So here is chlorophyll. These are the flavonols, flavone, and lutein. Here's Mr. Orange, that is beta-carotene, okay? Beta-carotene is in orange vegetables like carrots and squash. And here is lycopene. Lycopene is a key component within tomatoes, okay, and it gives it that red color. So, color is chemistry. If you kind of understand it, you see these various colors in vegetables or in hair dyes, we'll talk about that in a few minutes, it's because of the chemicals that are inside, okay, just a side note. Okay, so we talk about here, this is the biosynthetic pathway going from tyrosine down to melanin, and this is an important enzyme. Okay, so here's a similar one here, the pheomelanins versus the eumelanins, and here is our friend tyrosinase. Okay, going from tyrosine to L-DOPA. Okay, if that enzyme is broken, okay, what happens when tyrosinase is mutated? Okay, we'll get something called albinism. Okay, albino or albinism is a condition where these individuals have melanocytes, but they lack a functional tyrosinase. Okay, tyrosinase is not functional in these individuals, and therefore they lack pigmentation. They just can't make it. It's a genetic disease, so all of their hair and skin, eyelashes, all have a lack of pigmentation. Okay? It can happen in Caucasians, it can happen in folks of African descent, folks of Asian descent, all of them can have albinism. And it even happens within the animal kingdom. Okay? So this is a condition that is across the animal kingdom. And all of them have a deficiency in this one protein called tyrosinase, and they can't make melanin. They're also very sensitive to light because, in fact, a function of melanin is really to absorb light around the eye. Okay? And so you'll notice that people that are albino really try to protect their eyes, and they really stay out of the bright sunlight too much because they have zero protection from UV. Okay, so in fact, people that have darker pigmentation, there's been some studies done that let's say the darkest African tribe, so let's say from Ethiopia, I have some friends from Ethiopia, they have kind of the equivalent of an SPF rating of like 12, okay, SPF 12. You know that when you go out to most of us Caucasians, we go out to the beach, like we gotta slather that stuff on because we're gonna get sunburned. And that's true of all people that get exposed to UV. But the SPF rating kind of goes up with the ability to absorb more UV. So the higher the number, the better the protection, okay, or the longer the duration of the protection. So SPF 50 or 70, those are really high SPFs, right? So if you get down to like 20, it's kind of helpful, but you're losing some of the effectiveness, but still a little bit of protection. So that the most darkly pigmented human in the world has an SPF of about 12. If you're talking about this as baseline, meaning 0, okay, all of us that are not albinos have some melanin, okay? We have some melanin. Some of us have more than others, okay? And so if this means 0, okay, SPF, then the darkest pigment is about 12 to 15, okay? That's what a paper that I read. So that's kind of interesting. There's an increased protection against sun damage. All right, so this is from NASA, okay? NASA can measure the amount of UV radiation hitting the globe, okay? And the heat map here represents higher amounts of UV, and then as we go up towards the north, lower and decreasing amounts of UV, and then down towards the south here, decreasing amounts of UV. And that's because the sun, the rays of the sun are kind of hitting the globe more directly and more perpendicularly here in the equator. And as you follow the curvature of the Earth backwards, okay, then you're going to have less UV exposure at these northern or southern climes. Okay, so that kind of matches, okay, another map that I'm going to show you. Notice where we have the highest amount of UV, okay, around the equator, and really high up in the mountains. Here's the Andes Mountains, and here's the Himalayas. Himalayas is where Mount Everest is, okay? Very high elevation and more high exposure to UV. Well, let's lay on there another map, okay? This is a map provided by a doctor that studies pigmentation around the globe. And back before globalization, when lots of people groups were traveling all over the world, This is a representation of the native coloration of native peoples. Okay, we see a darker pigmentation near the equator and near where there's high mountain ranges, the Andes and the Himalayas. Okay, there tends to be people groups with higher levels of pigmentation. So we see an adaptive mechanism that people that are around higher amounts of UV over time adapt for higher pigmentation levels. If you go higher into the north or further to the south, those people groups tend to, it's a generalization, they tend to have lower pigmentation. So that's kind of a cool scientific finding, okay? And so much of this work was done by a scientist, Jana Jablonski, I think is her name. You can YouTube her, and she gives TED Talks on this topic. And I've borrowed some of her content for these slides. Okay, this is my son. Okay, this is his biological mother, and this is his biological father. So, skin color is close to my heart because you can see that his skin color is a mixture of his biological mother and his biological father. Okay, he does not look like his adoptive parents, which have relatively more pale skin. Okay, so this is my wife, this is my son, this is Rara, okay, his biological mother, and then this is her daughter. Okay, you can tell that they have deeper pigmentation than either of them. So very sweet photo, very near and dear to me. This photo is probably 5 years old now, but we have an open adoption. I talk about it all the time, and it's fantastic. And the science behind the pigmentation there is very interesting to me. So genetics play a key role, as you might expect, with the genes that are causing the different types of melanin to be produced. All right, so moving away from skin color, okay? That was what I call the science of skin color. Now we're going to talk a little bit about vitamin D and why vitamin D is so important. I forgot to start my timer, so let me check my time here. Okay, 21 minutes. So vitamin D, okay, in particular vitamin D3, which is known as cholecalciferol, okay, that's a mouthful. Vitamin D3 is cholecalciferol, okay, everybody say it. Cholecalciferol, okay, that's vitamin D3, okay, so if you take vitamins, and you should, okay, because we don't often get enough vitamin D3 in our diet, okay, green leafy vegetables are really important. We need vitamin D3. It's very good for our health, it's good for our immune system, it's good for our cardiovascular and our skeletal system. And we're going to learn why. Okay? The liver and the kidneys, in combination with the skin, combine, they work together, they integrate to help us to absorb calcium and phosphorus and prevent a disease called rickets. Okay? Rickets is a deficiency in vitamin D. Okay? Rickets, as you can see here, here's a young individual that did not have sufficient vitamin D. The bones do not accumulate enough matrix, and therefore when you walk on them, the bones will tend to bend slightly and cause these deformities in the curvature of the bones. Okay? So nutritional deficits can cause skeletal changes. So how does that work? Why is the skin so important for vitamin D? So in the skin, we can absorb sunlight, okay? And sunlight is required to convert a beginning steroid compound into something called cholecalciferol, okay, vitamin D3. We can make our own vitamin D3. And then that vitamin D3 goes to the liver and is converted into something else, and then it goes to the kidney, and then finally the calcitriol, so cholecalciferol is converted to something, and then calcitriol, that allows some signaling that allows us to bring calcium and phosphate in, or absorb it from the GI tract. Okay? So we need this molecule to be present so that we can properly absorb calcium and phosphate. And so skin, liver, and kidney work together in a very unique pathway that helps us absorb dietary calcium and dietary phosphate. If we lack this, then we won't get calcium and phosphate, and therefore we will prevent proper bone health, okay, and growth. Okay. So system integration here, okay, integumentary system, okay, the digestive system and the urinary system work together, okay, to help us absorb calcium. So here's another diagram. Again, the skin, the liver, and the kidney. They're working together. This is the same pathway. I'm showing it to you a couple different ways. Maybe one of them will be more helpful than the other. Here we have 7-dehydrocholesterol. Okay, it's just a precursor molecule. And in the presence of sun, specifically UV, okay, a little bit of UV is okay. Okay, we can convert this molecule into cholecalciferol, okay, vitamin D3. Okay, that will travel through the blood to the liver. Cholecalciferol gets converted to calcitriol. It travels from the liver to the kidney. Calcitriol is converted, calcidiol, diol here. Calcidiol goes to the kidney, gets converted into calcitriol, and this molecule helps us signal to absorb more calcium. Okay? Skin, liver, and kidneys work together to help absorb calcium. Why is the skin important? Because we need UV exposure to make this conversion. This step requires sunlight. Okay? This step requires sunlight. That's important. So if we don't have proper sun exposure, okay, with a good source of cholesterol, we need to get it from our diet. Okay? So if you're not spending some time outside, okay, to get some vitamin D, you need to supplement. Okay? So you can get vitamin D from your diet. If you take a supplement, you take some green leafy vegetables or other vitamin D rich source, you can supplement your vitamin D. Okay? Let's say you're a hermit, you stay inside all the time and there's no sunlight. Okay? You could have a pretty healthy life if you take a supplement or you have a healthy diet. Okay? Some of that can get stored in the fat, and so there's an exchange with our fat. Okay? But once we get to vitamin D3, cholecalciferol, we go to calcitriol, calcidiol, and then calcitriol, and then we get to this molecule here, which is the useful molecule for signaling through the receptors here that help us downstream. All right, same deal, okay? Skin, liver, kidneys, and then all the downstream effects, okay? So this is the shape of the pathway on this diagram. I'm showing it to you a couple times because one of these might be more useful than the others, okay? The importance of vitamin D for insulin sensitization, anti-inflammatory responses, and serum lipid balance. Okay? There's lots of downstream effects, including our absorption of calcium. All right, so epidermal factor, okay? Epidermal growth factor, EGF, is important for stimulating the epidermis, okay? Epidermal growth factor. So it's a growth factor, which is a hormone that tells the epidermis to keep making more cells. So this is part of the endocrine system, okay? It's a hormone that signals to the skin to make cells. Promotes division of germinative cells in the stratum basale. The stratum basale is where those germinative cells live, and this is a hormone that triggers those cells to continue to divide. So you always have a little bit of this signaling all the time, and you can regulate growth based on its levels in the body. All right, so we have found our way all the way down through the epidermis. Okay, we just studied this top layer. Okay, it had some special topics. We talked about the cell types. We talked about the five or four different layers. We talked about skin color with the melanocytes, and we talked about vitamin D. Okay, so next we're going to go into the dermis. Okay, we're going to go into the dermis. The dermis spans from the bottom of the basement membrane all the way down to the hypodermis, which is, again, not a clear boundary, but it's a loose boundary where we begin to see lots of fat tissue, okay, the adipose tissue, the dermis. Okay, the dermis has two layers. Okay, it has a papillary layer and it has a reticular layer. Okay, the dermis has two layers. The upper layer is the papillary layer. The papilla means kind of like nipple or protrusion. These little bumps here are the little papilla. And so the upper 1/3 to 1/4 of the dermis is called the papillary, and the remainder of it is the reticular dermis. Okay? The papillary layer is loose areolar, and the reticular is dense irregular. Okay? Loose areolar and dense irregular. Again, there's no formal boundary between these two layers. It is really a mishmash of the different tissue types, but the closer you get to the epidermis, the more likely you're going to have the papillary layer, loose areolar, and the deeper that you go, the more likely you're going to have reticular dermis, which is dense irregular. Okay, so these words on the screen just state what I've just said. Okay, papillary layer, loose areolar. There are capillaries found here, and there's sensory neurons. We'll look at the image and point those things out. Okay, the reticular layer, dense, irregular, larger blood vessels, and lots of collagen. And we'll point those things out as well. Dermatitis, okay? Itis, whenever you see itis in the body, it means inflammation, okay? Arthritis, dermatitis, pancreatitis, appendicitis, all the itises means an inflammation, means an inappropriate inflammation. So contact dermatitis means you have some rash, okay? A rash appears on the skin because you've had some oil from like urushiol. Urushiol is the oil that lives on the edges of poison ivy, okay? I'm a big hiker. I love to be outdoors, go out to the Ozarks all the time, and I know what poison ivy looks like because I'm in it knee deep all the time. Okay, leaves of 3, let them be. Okay, that's the little sing-songy thing that you teach your kids. Leaves of 3, let them be. They're usually low-lying, unless they're on the vine, they're climbing up trees. Okay, you also have poison oak and poison sumac, which look a little bit different. This is the main one that we see most commonly in Arkansas. Okay, you brush up against the oil gets on your skin, and the skin, the interaction here causes what we call contact dermatitis. Itchy, you form these pustules that are full of fluid. The pustules don't contain more of the poison ivy oil, okay? That's a myth, okay? When the oil gets on your skin, okay, it stays on your skin. It's very sticky, as it were, okay? And if you wash it off thoroughly, that first washing, so let's say you're out in the woods, you go home, you take a really good shower, and with water, soap, and friction, those are the key things, water, soap, and friction. Or maybe some ethanol. Ethanol can also dissolve the oil. If you really focus on the areas of your body, if you've been in your arms or the lower leg, okay, you scrub it down, you can go into the woods and be around this for a couple hours and not have a strong response, okay? I do it all the time. I go right home, I put my clothes in a special area, I don't let anything that's been on my boots or my pants touch anything else. Okay, I wash them right away with some good detergent. Don't let those clothes rub up against anything, like even inside of your car seat, like the way that your clothes touch things, the oil can rub off on them, okay? And in that way, you can spread it around without even noticing it, because the oil is invisible. I'm going on and on about poison ivy. It's important to my life because I have a very bad reaction, and I don't like it, so I take very special precautions when I'm in the woods. Anyways, dermatitis. The strength and elasticity are conferred by collagen fibers and elastic fibers, okay? Strength and elasticity, okay? That's something that the dermis provides, strength and elasticity. Skin turgor is the property of flexible and resilience to pulling. As you age, your skin will get thinner and you have less skin turgor. Skin turgor means that when you pinch the skin and you let go, it goes right back down, and you don't notice that you've pinched the skin anywhere. In an older individual, you can pinch the skin and it will retain, and it'll kind of slowly regress back into its original status. You have a loss of skin turgor. All right, skin damage, okay? Can be caused by dehydration, age, hormonal changes, UV exposure. Okay, all of these can reduce skin turgor with age. All right, stretch marks. okay, can result from pregnancy or weight gain. It's the thickened tissue resulting from excessive stretching of skin. Okay, so the skin is stretched in a way that is inappropriate and it leaves a mark behind because of the connective tissue. Okay, this is what the collagen fibers look like underneath an electron microscope. Okay, another cool application or interesting thing to think about are these cleavage lines. Okay, cleavage lines, it's not what you think. It is the arrangement of the bundles of collagen in a parallel fashion across the body surface. We say that the dermis is dense, irregular, okay, mostly dense, irregular, and that the fibers are kind of crisscross applesauce, right? They're going in all different directions. However, that's true, okay, but there are trends that have been identified across the human body where the fibers tend to run more parallel and in a certain direction, okay? And the cleavage lines is a mapping of these general trends. Who cares? Well, when you're going into surgery and you make an incision, if you run perpendicular to the cleavage line, when you lay the skin back down after closing up the surgical wound, okay, the healing will not work, the healing goes more slowly. However, if you make your surgical incision parallel to the cleavage lines, the healing tends to work better, okay? It's just one of those things that surgeons have observed over the years. And so this is a mapping of the common cleavage lines. So anywhere in your body, if you're having surgery, there's a good chance that your surgeon will follow an incision that follows parallel to these cleavage lines. And therefore the healing post-op will be much better. Okay? And it has to do with the arrangements of your collagen in the dermis. Also indicates the tension lines. That is, there are certain parts of your body that are held more tightly. If you, right here around, like in median to the outsides of your, the corners of your mouth, if you go down, the skin is pretty tight against your chin here. If you go up just a little bit, okay, it pulls way out, okay? That's why when people get old, they get these jowls, right? Because the attachment here, medial to the corners of your mouth, is really tight, and the attachment here is really loosey-goosey, okay? It has to do with the way that the connective tissue is attached to the jawline. All right, let's talk a little bit about vessels, okay? We talked about the dermis, we talked about the papillary layer and the reticular layer. Now we're gonna talk about blood vessels, okay? There are 3 plexuses, okay, in the dermis, okay? The papillary plexus, which is shown here loosely in blue, it's kind of the upper portion. And so this is where the smallest of the blood vessels exist, the capillaries, okay? You have capillaries that reach all the way up into the dermal papilla. And they have to get up here because all of the epidermal cells, the keratinocytes, need their blood supply, oxygen and glucose, and remove waste products. So these small capillaries are called the papillary plexus. It's a collection of blood vessels. Okay? Blood vessels, and frankly, you can think about nerve fibers going up there as well. The venous plexus is slightly lower. You can see just below, outside of the papilla, is another collection of small arteries, but they're not as small as the capillaries. They're called the venous plexus. Okay? And then much deeper, underneath the dermis, we have the cutaneous plexus. It's really the set of large arteries that are much deeper underneath the dermis. Okay, so we go big vessels, medium vessels, tiny vessels. Okay, big, medium, tiny, as we go from deep to superficial. Okay? And so that's the way that the blood is distributed, and all of these tissues are receiving sufficient blood supply. Now, don't mistake, there are capillaries in this region as well, and the blood perfuses this tissue very easily, much easier than the surface. Okay? We have lots of capillaries near the surface because it's an effective way of distributing heat. Okay? Body temperature is a big thing that we're going to come back and talk about. A contusion. A contusion is another word for a bruise, okay? When you're black and blue, it's because you have damaged some of these vessels that are deep. Now, if you damage them and cut the skin, well, then you'll bleed because the blood can exit the body. But if you damage the tissue and there's no cut in the skin, well, then that blood kind of leaks out in the dermis, okay? And so the black and blue that you see is really just that leaked blood that over time will change color from a deep blue or red, and the blood in the heme gets processed into more kind of a green and then to a yellow, and then it kind of disappears. Okay? A contusion. A bruise is a bleed that's deep in the skin and it's not exiting the body. All right, let's talk about body temperature. Okay, body temperature. We talked about the cutaneous plexus, the venous plexus, and the papillary plexus. These are blood vessels that are servicing the skin. Okay? The deeper you go, the bigger the vessels. So, two kind of extremes in temperature. Okay? Really cold on the left and really warm on the right. Let's start with the cold. Okay? Wintertime is coming up. You might take Christmas time and go to Colorado and go skiing. I don't know, whatever. Okay? When it's cold outside, our body can detect cold and it can regulate blood flow so that we restrict heat loss, okay? Because our body needs to maintain body heat, not lose it, okay? Because the external environment is cold. Therefore, these deep vessels, okay, will retain more blood flow, and these peripheral or shallow vessels will restrict blood flow. Okay, and that's so that most of the fluid, okay, which contains the heat, stays deep. Okay, and therefore we retain as much heat as possible. Okay. During hot weather in the summer in Arkansas or Texas or wherever, okay, really hot, you are exercising, your body temperature is going up, and you need to get rid of excess heat, because if you overheat, that's bad for you as well. So now, instead of the blood flowing deep, the blood will flow shallow, and therefore all the heat comes with the plasma, it's carried in the blood, and the heat can then dissipate across the skin, and you can have evaporative cooling, you can sweat, and you get rid of that body heat. Okay? If you have a nice cool breeze, okay, you can get rid of that excess body heat. We control the blood flow here by sphincters. A sphincter is a circular arrangement of muscle that can squeeze and direct blood flow one direction or the other. And these sphincters are controlled by the nervous system, which can detect cold and hot. Okay? So this is how our skin integrates with our cardiovascular system. Okay? And the function here is the preservation and the regulation of body temperature. Okay? Not too cold, not too hot, just right. Okay? Goldilocks principle. The skin has these different plexuses, and we can shift where does the blood go, and the blood carries heat because water, which makes up most of the blood, has a high heat capacity, and we can dissipate that heat by bringing it near the surface, and the breeze or the air around it can remove that heat. Okay. All right. I am out of time, so when we come back, we're going to finish off the notes. We are right here going to talk about sensation, and we'll finish off the rest of the notes next time.